You woke up this morning. You made coffee, or you checked your phone, or you stood in the shower longer than you needed to. And at no point, not for a single second, did you genuinely believe that one day you will not wake up at all. That is not denial. That is not avoidance. That is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. And the story of why it does, that is one of the strangest, most unsettling, and most quietly important things you will ever learn about yourself. Your brain cannot simulate its own absence. Think about that for a moment. You can imagine almost anything. You can picture a world where gravity works sideways, or where the sky is green, or where you're living in a completely different country with a completely different life. But when you try to imagine a world where you simply do not exist, not sleeping, not unconscious, just gone, your mind slips. It finds nothing. It returns to you, standing here, imagining. Psychologist Yair Dorzeiderman at Bar-Ilan University ran a series of experiments on this exact phenomenon. His team measured brain activity as participants were shown faces paired with words like funeral and burial, and then, suddenly, their own face. What he found was remarkable. When the word death was linked to a stranger's face, the brain registered it. But when it was linked to the participant's own face, the brain actively blocked the association. It refused to connect the concept of death to the self. This is not a glitch. This is architecture. Dorzeiderman called this the mortality salience buffer. Your brain has a built-in mechanism that filters out death when it becomes too personally threatening. Not forever, not completely, but enough. Enough to keep you functional. Enough to keep you making plans, starting projects, falling in love, planting trees you will never sit under. Because here is what your ancestors understood, not in words, but in survival. The creature that spent every waking hour paralyzed by the awareness of its own mortality did not hunt well. It did not build shelter well. It did not raise children or lead a tribe or venture into unknown territory. It froze, and freezing, in the ancient world, was a death sentence faster than any predator. So evolution made a deal with you. It gave you just enough awareness of death to avoid immediate danger, a cliff edge, a charging animal, a rotten piece of meat. And it took away your ability to truly feel your own mortality as a lived, constant reality. The awareness is there. The feeling is not. And that gap is one of the most profound things about being human. Terror management theory takes this idea even further. Developed in the 1980s by social psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Piszczynski, it argues that almost everything humans build, culture, religion, legacy, art, status, the need to be remembered, is a response to the terror of knowing we will die. We construct symbolic immortality. We make things that will outlast us. We join movements larger than ourselves. We carve names into stone. In experiment after experiment, Greenberg, Solomon, and Piszczynski found that when people were subtly reminded of their own death, even just by sitting near a funeral home, even just by completing a word puzzle that included death-related terms, they became more defensive of their worldview, more hostile to people who held different beliefs, more generous to those who validated their sense of meaning. The awareness of death, even when it was barely conscious, changed behavior dramatically. Your brain knows. It just does not let you feel it fully. And in that narrow space between knowing and feeling, you build an entire life. There is a word in ancient Greek, ataraxia. It means a state of serene, undisturbed calm. The Epicurean philosophers pursued it as the highest possible human state. And Epicurus himself had a simple argument about death. He said, "When death is, I am not. When I am, death is not. Therefore, death is nothing to me." For centuries, philosophers have debated whether this logic holds. But what neuroscience now suggests is that your brain reached the same conclusion long before Epicurus was born, not through reasoning, but through wiring. This is why you can read an article about mortality statistics and feel nothing. This is why you can attend a funeral, feel the weight of grief, and still, 3 days later, be annoyed about the traffic, or excited about a vacation, or making plans for next year and the year after that. Your emotional system does not extrapolate. It does not sit with the abstract future. It lives here in the present where you are still breathing. But there are cracks, moments where the buffer fails. A diagnosis, a near miss on the highway, the death of someone your own age. In those moments, the full weight of mortality breaks through, and the experience is not philosophical. It is visceral. Your chest tightens. Time feels different. The ordinary world looks briefly, terrifyingly precious. Psychologists call this a mortality salient spike, a moment when the brain's defenses are overwhelmed by evidence too close and too specific to filter. And something strange happens in those moments. People become different. Study by Laura Carstensen at Stanford University on what she calls socio-emotional selectivity theory found that when people perceive their future as limited, whether due to age, illness, or a recent brush with death, they shift their priorities dramatically. They spend more time with people they love. They stop pursuing status for its own sake. They lose interest in petty conflicts. They become, in measurable ways, more themselves. The nearness of death strips away the noise. What this suggests is that the very mechanism your brain uses to protect you from mortality anxiety is also the thing that keeps you slightly sedated, comfortable, distracted. The buffer that lets you function also lets you sleepwalk. It keeps you at a comfortable distance from the one fact that, if you sat with it long enough, might rearrange everything. Ancient Stoic philosophers had a practice for this. They called it memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a morbid exercise, not as a punishment, but as a tool. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it in his private journals, never intending them to be published. He reminded himself, again and again, that the emperors before him were gone, that the cities they built had crumbled, that the names once celebrated were now dust. And he asked himself, given this, what actually matters today? The Stoics were, in their way, doing manually what your brain refuses to do automatically. They were disabling the buffer on purpose, briefly, deliberately, not to induce paralysis, but to induce clarity. Because here is the counterintuitive truth. The awareness of death is not the enemy of a good life. It is, in measured doses, the engine of one. The research on post-traumatic growth, the documented phenomenon in which people who survive serious illness or near-death experiences report lasting improvements in relationships, purpose, and emotional depth, suggests that confronting mortality does not break people. For many, it reorganizes them. Your brain refuses to believe you will die. It does this to protect you. It does this so you can plan and hope and strive and love without constant existential vertigo. That protection is real, and it is valuable, and it is one of the quiet miracles of your biology. But every so often, right now, maybe reading this, the buffer thins just enough. And in that thin space, a question arrives. Not a terrifying one, a clarifying one. Given that this will end, what do you actually want to do with the time that is not? Tonight, when you check your phone, or make your coffee, or stand in the shower longer than you need to, your brain will be doing its job, keeping the thought at arm's length, keeping you functional, keeping you here. What you do with that here is entirely up to you.